Okay, guys, we're back. Today we're going to be talking about 19th century India. But remember, keep in the context when we talk about 19th century India, it's really how the British are imposing more centralized control on India. Arguably, all the way back to the beginning of the 18th century, Britain has had a presence in India. And remember, we're going to talk about some turning points, but ever since the beginning of the 18th century, it's going to be more and more and more and more centralized control into India. Now, with the British in India, there are a couple big turning points that really show how the British are amassing power in India. First big turning point, and we've talked about this, is the Battle of Plassey. Remember Robert Clive, Sirajuddaula, the big fight, people buying off other people's armies, war elephants. We already talked about this. It's a big turning point because now the British East India Tea Company controls the Bengal region in the north, which is a major area. The next big turning point is in 1818. And this is when the British defeat what is called the Maratha Confederacy. Okay? And when they defeat the Maratha Confederacy, it opens up another large area, specifically a very large city called Bombay, which doesn't exist anymore, but it opens up Bombay to the British. Now, they control that area. Lastly, we're going to have the victories over the Sikhs and victories in the Punjab region. Now, look, this is pretty important because the Sikhs and the Punjabis, they were always some of the most fearsome fighters in South Asia. So, of course, when they're defeated, really Britain has control over most of the subcontinent, either directly or indirectly, by 1849. Now, keep in mind, things aren't going to completely change. I mean, they mostly change. They don't completely change. A lot of this control by the British is really helped by what are called princely rulers. Remember, throughout history, there is no such thing as a unified India. We're going to get there, just not yet. You had all these numerous kingdoms and principalities. Well, the princely states, these were princes that retained their title to their kingdom. It's just that they don't have any real political authority. They're going to serve as intermediaries or middlemen from the Indian people, through the princely rulers, to the British authority. They're that conduit between the British authority and the majority of the Indian people. Also, the British were helped by the zamindars. Now, we haven't used the word zamindar in a while, but remember, the zamindars were the tax collectors for the Mughals. Remember, the Mughals would send the zamindars to these little kingdoms and say, we're going to collect the taxes personally. Just so you shut up, we're going to give you a percentage. You don't have to do anything. And tax collection becomes more efficient. So instead of now the zamindars reporting to the Mughals, the zamindars are reporting to the British. Okay? Now, of course, like that being said, remember, we talked about this. The zamindars are now paid in land, as opposed to a cut in the tax collection. Also, one other thing, with industrialization, with industrialization, we're also going to see that while England is becoming more and more industrialized, they're pumping all that product into South Asia, which really causes South Asia to become deindustrialized. So there's higher unemployment in South Asia. People are going to the countrysides because they can't find work because really British and European products are putting them out of business. Okay? All right. Also, some other new technologies really that came about because of industrialization are going to have a giant impact on South Asia. Specifically, we're talking about railroads. I mean, look, you got to understand, with railroads, with telegraphs, that's going to significantly alter the relationship between the Indian people and the Brits. In the 18th century, or when the British are starting to get to South Asia, A lot of times it's the British men, the company men, they're going into South Asia essentially by themselves to trade. All right, and they're assimilating into the dominant Indian culture. They're assimilating into the dominant South Asian culture. They're wearing, Indian outfits, like the loose-fitting cotton garments. They are, adopting Indian cuisine, more of a vegetarian diet. They are dating or marrying or hooking up with Indian women. Well, that's all going to change with more sophisticated transportation methods, specifically the steamship, specifically the railroads. With these new technologies, British women and their families are going to start moving into India. Now there is a larger degree of British women in India. So you can kind of guess what's going to happen with, essentially the miscegenation aspect of South Asia. Since there are British women now, the British men are not necessarily going to start taking Indian women. Now they're going to start having enclaves in particular parts of the city where only British people are allowed to be. Because now more families, more women are moving to South Asia. Also keep in mind too, there's going to be a reversal of culture. Now we're going to see Indians start adopting more Western things as opposed to British adopting more Indian things. Okay? And when I'm talking about things, I'm really talking about culture. Okay? In terms of adopting British culture, there's one guy you really need to know, and the man's name is Ramanhood Roy. Okay? Now, look, he's an Indian businessman, very learned, very educated. He speaks multiple languages. He is a businessman, so he deals very closely with the British. He is in close contact with British officials. And really, he starts to promote a reformed version of Hinduism. He starts to promote a reformed version of Hinduism that takes classical ideas of Hinduism, but merges them with more social reforms that were introduced by the British. Okay, so he's combining the two. Now Roy and Roy's ideas, they're a part of what we call the Bengal Renaissance. Okay? Also, too, keep in mind that Roy, he tried to fight against some of the policies of the British that were hurting the Indians. He said, it's not fair for you guys to give privileges to the British, but then not give privileges to the Indians. Okay? So this is all part of the Bengal Renaissance, which was encouraged by British liberals. British liberals are looking at the people in South Asia and saying, good job, I like what you're doing there. Because look, they favored free trade. That is a form of liberalism. They wanted free trade because the people in Britain knew they would make more money. Also, there was the belief that the Bengal Renaissance would help progress South Asia. It would help bring them up to speed. Now, keep in mind, when we say progress, it's, oh, I'm glad you South Asian people are being more like Western Europe. That is how you are going to progress. Okay, so you replace Indian culture with a lot of British culture. Now look, not everybody is going to be down with this, but a lot of people were. Also too, if we're talking about replacing Indian culture with Western culture, you got to bring in the Christian missionaries. Look, we're going to see in the 19th century, more and more and more Christian missionaries are going to start filtering into South Asia. Now look, they're met with suspicion. I mean, even today, there's not a huge majority or even a huge minority of Christians in South Asia. But since the British are having more control, the Europeans are having more control, the Christian missionaries are going to come in. Now, like I said, a lot of times they were suspicious. They were seen as, I don't know what these guys are trying to do, because it was given the perception that they were trying to get rid of they were trying to get rid of Indian culture. Okay? Now, let's go on to the next Roman numeral and let's talk about the Sepoy Rebellion. Okay? So the Indian Revolt of 1857. Okay. Now the Indian Mutiny, Sepoy Rebellion, it's the same thing. Different books will call it different things. Okay, but the story's still the same. Okay. In 1857, you're going to have about 200,000 Sepoys lose their mind and start rebelling against their British commanders. Now, just in case you forgot, let's talk about who the Sepoys are. The Sepoys were those Indian fighters. They're from different parts of South Asia, but they're paid by the British. They're trained by the British. They're supplied by the British. They serve under British officers. And look, they are a very formidable fighting force. Okay? So, 200,000 of these guys rebel. Now, the question is, rebelling? Why are they rebelling? And let's talk about it, okay? The British are going to introduce a new rifle into its army in South Asia. Now, look, guys, you got to understand, this new rifle, it's something you should want, okay? It is more accurate. It loads faster. It jams less. Why wouldn't you want this thing? Okay. Well, let's talk about it. The cartridges that the gun used, okay, they came in like a little sack, and you'd have to like bite it and rip it off and then put the ammo into the gun. There were rumors, whether it's true or not, that these cartridges were sealed with some kind of fat from an animal. Now, the Muslims who were in the Sepoys, they thought that it was sealed with beef fat. That's a no-no. I'm sorry, pork fat. The Indians believed that it was sealed with beef fat, like the Hindus, which is a no-no. Regardless, neither the Muslims in South Asia or the Hindus in South Asia wanted to adopt this new weapon because of the possibility they may come in contact with something they don't want to come in contact with. Of course, the British responded by saying, I hear your concerns, now shut up and use the rifle. This is going to cause the rebellion. We're going to see that both sides see this as not only the British saying, you're going to do what we tell you to do, but also the British, maybe trying to get rid of their religion and maybe trying to push Christianity in there. Okay? So the Sepoys that did not use the gun, they were imprisoned. Well, many of the remaining Sepoys, they hold protests. They start marching to Delhi. And we're going to see this is going to cause a larger revolt throughout Western India and Northern India. And keep in mind, guys, this is not going to be a nice revolt. This is not going to be a peaceful protest. These Sepoys are going to come in, they're going to kill British people. And I'm not talking about just British men. They're going to go in and they're going to kill women. They're going to go and kill children. And of course, in retaliation, the British are going to be just as cruel, just as barbaric. So this is going to be a problem that has to be solved by the British. And in the next video, we're going to talk about the aftermath of what happens with the Sepoy Rebellion.